This might challenge what you think you know about wealth, power, and where European dominance actually began. While most of medieval Europe was locked in feudal stagnation, agricultural poverty, and endless territorial wars, one city was doing the opposite. Deliberately, systematically, and with ruthless success. It wasn't conquering vast territories. It was conquering something far more valuable. Trade routes. This period is often called the rise of Venice, but that label hides the machinery behind it. What actually powered this explosion of wealth and influence was a very specific system. The Venetian Republic, built on a lagoon where nothing should have survived, became the richest city in Europe for 700 years. Not a vague maritime success story. Not an accidental empire. A designed commercial machine built to extract wealth from every corner of the known world. Welcome to finance history, where commerce, strategy, and survival intersect. And nothing ever happens by accident. In the year 697, a decision was made that would quietly reshape European and global trade for centuries. Venetian settlers, refugees from barbarian invasions on the mainland, chose to stay permanently in the marshy lagoons of the northern Adriatic. This wasn't strategic genius, it was survival. They had no farmland, no natural resources, no military protection from great powers. What they had was water, isolation, and desperation. And from that desperation, they built something no one expected. A state that would dominate Mediterranean commerce longer than Rome ruled as an empire. Venice wasn't placed ideally. It sat in a swamp. But what it lacked in geography, it compensated for with position. The city controlled the only secure deep-water access to northern Italy. To the east lay the Byzantine Empire and the routes to Constantinople. To the south, the entire Mediterranean. To the north, the Alpine passes connecting to Germany and Central Europe. To the west, the Italian mainland and eventually the Atlantic. This position mattered, but position alone creates nothing. Plenty of coastal towns had access to trade and remained insignificant. What made Venice different was that it turned necessity into advantage. From the beginning, Venice functioned as pure infrastructure. The city had no hinterland to tax, no agricultural base to feed it, no mines to exploit. Everything had to be imported. That meant Venice had to trade or starve. But instead of weakness, this created focus. Unlike territorial states that could survive on internal production, Venice had to make trade profitable, reliable, and continuous. And it did. The entire political system was designed around one goal: protect and expand commerce. Laws, diplomacy, military force, every institution served the same purpose. Wealth through exchange. At a time when most European rulers measured power in land and peasants, Venice measured it in contracts and ships. The state didn't just participate in trade. It organized it. Merchant convoys sailed on fixed schedules protected by state galleys. Insurance systems pooled risk. Legal codes standardized contracts. Disputes were resolved quickly in commercial courts. This wasn't merchant capitalism evolving naturally. It was state-directed commercial infrastructure built with the precision of military engineering. And it worked because trust was enforced, not assumed. This stands in sharp contrast to most of medieval Europe, where trade was local, dangerous, and irregular. Merchants operated alone or in small family networks. Long-distance commerce was rare and extremely risky. Banditry was common. Legal systems were fragmented. Currencies varied wildly. Venice solved these problems systematically. It didn't wait for trust to emerge. It created institutions that made trust irrelevant. You didn't need to trust a Venetian merchant. You trusted Venetian law. That distinction powered everything. The foundation of Venetian wealth wasn't gold or territory. It was information and speed. Venice developed the Mediterranean's most sophisticated intelligence network. Diplomats, merchants, and spies reported constantly on prices, politics, wars, harvests, and opportunities across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. This information flowed back to Venice, where it was analyzed, synthesized, and acted upon faster than any competitor. If war threatened a trade route, Venetian ships rerouted before others knew conflict had started. If famine drove up grain prices somewhere, Venetian merchants arrived first with supply. If a rival city weakened, Venetian diplomats negotiated favorable treaties before competitors reacted. Information was wealth, and Venice treated it like a strategic resource. But information alone doesn't move goods. Venice built the largest merchant fleet in Europe, hundreds of ships operating on coordinated schedules. Unlike other maritime powers that relied on private merchants, Venice operated state-owned galleys for high-value cargo. Spices, silk, precious metals, these traveled under state protection with state insurance. Private merchants could buy space, but the system was controlled. This hybrid model, part state, part private, maximized both efficiency and control. And wealth didn't just accumulate at the top. It circulated. Ship captains, crew, dock workers, shipbuilders, rope makers, sail weavers, insurance brokers, notaries, accountants. Venice created an entire ecosystem of specialized commercial labor. Social mobility existed not through land ownership, but through commercial success. A merchant's son could become wealthier than minor nobility. Money mattered more than bloodline. That was revolutionary for medieval Europe, where status was inherited and rigid. What's striking is how capitalist this sounds. Financial historians often treat sophisticated finance as a product of later Dutch or British innovation. But Venice was already operating advanced financial systems centuries earlier. Marine insurance, joint stock companies, government bonds, double-entry bookkeeping, bills of exchange, all appeared in Venice before they became common elsewhere. This wasn't theoretical finance. It was practical infrastructure built to solve real problems. How do you fund a trading voyage when one ship's sinking could bankrupt you? Insurance. How do you raise capital for expensive ventures without risking everything personally? Joint stock companies. How do you finance government operations without oppressive taxation? Issue bonds backed by future customs revenue. Venice invented or perfected these tools not from economic theory, but from survival necessity. The result was scale. Venetian merchants operated across continents. Capital pooled. Risk spread. Productivity increased. And the city absorbed a share of it all through customs duties, port fees, and taxes on transactions. But Venice's wealth didn't come from trade alone. It came from something more ruthless. The systematic monopolization of key commodities. This is where Venetian commercial strategy becomes uncomfortably modern. Venice didn't just participate in markets. It controlled them. Take the spice trade. Pepper, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, these were among the most valuable commodities in medieval Europe. They came from Asia through Middle Eastern intermediaries. Venice secured exclusive contracts with Egyptian and Syrian suppliers, then enforced its monopoly violently. Any rival Italian city attempting to trade directly faced Venetian naval blockades. Treaties were backed by force. Markets were carved up through diplomacy and violence. This created artificial scarcity in Europe that Venice exploited for centuries. The markup was enormous. Spices bought in Alexandria could sell for 10 times the price in Northern Europe. Venice sat in the middle, extracting wealth from both ends. Or consider salt. Venice controlled salt production in the northern Adriatic. Salt was essential for preserving food, making it a strategic commodity. Venice restricted supply, fixed prices, and used salt as a diplomatic weapon. Cities that defied Venice found their salt deliveries cut off. It wasn't conquest. It was economic strangulation. And the contrast matters. Most medieval states relied on agricultural taxation and plunder. Venice relied on market manipulation and monopoly control. It didn't need to occupy territory. It needed to control trade choke points. That model was far more profitable and sustainable. What's important here is not to romanticize Venice. The city was oligarchic, ruthless, and willing to use extreme violence to protect commercial interests. But structurally, it understood something many societies missed. Wealth is not just produced, it is positioned. Venice didn't become rich because it made better goods than everyone else. It became rich because it sat between producers and consumers and made itself indispensable. This is the real lesson of Venice's rise. Wealth followed control of flows, not control of territory. Stability followed institutions designed for commerce, not war. Prosperity followed monopolies ruthlessly defended. And power followed the ability to make others dependent on your networks. The city was not invincible, but at its peak, Venice represented something rare in history. A place where economic design matched geographic possibility. By the time Northern Europe would later build its own commercial empires, Venice had already perfected the model, tested it, scaled it, and extracted centuries of wealth from it. The richest city in Europe wasn't defined by castles or armies. It was defined by contracts and ships. What made Venice extraordinary was not that it escaped history's pressures, but that it turned pressure into profit for longer than most empires existed. No economic system lasts forever, and the Venetian Republic was no exception. But its decline wasn't sudden, mysterious, or morally deserved in the way it's often portrayed. It was structural, and that's exactly why it matters. The first cracks didn't appear in markets or wealth. They appeared in geography, specifically in the discovery of new routes that bypassed Venice entirely. In 1498, Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama reached India by sailing around Africa. This changed everything. For centuries, Venice's monopoly depended on the fact that Asian goods had to pass through Middle Eastern intermediaries who dealt exclusively with Venice. The Portuguese route eliminated that bottleneck. Suddenly, Lisbon could import spices directly, cheaper and faster. Venice's markup advantage evaporated. This wasn't bad luck. It was obsolescence. The monopoly that had powered Venetian wealth for 300 years was now technologically irrelevant. At the same time, the Ottoman Empire expanded aggressively, conquering Constantinople in 1453 and eventually controlling most of Venice's traditional Eastern markets. Venice could still trade with the Ottomans, but no longer on favorable terms. The leverage shifted. What had been Venetian-dominated trade became negotiated commerce with a powerful rival. Profits shrank. Influence diminished. Then came the League of Cambrai in 1508, a coalition of European powers that allied specifically to destroy Venetian territorial holdings on the Italian mainland. Venice survived, but at enormous cost. Military spending surged. Resources diverted from commerce to defense. The state that had once treated war as a commercial tool found itself fighting for survival. None of this destroyed Venice's wealth outright, but it changed incentives. Defensive wars replaced profitable expansion. Maintaining existing monopolies became more expensive than they were worth. And gradually, Venetian merchants began investing elsewhere, in land, in bonds, in safer but less profitable ventures. Still, Venice endured. Trade continued. The city remained wealthy by any standard. Banking and finance persisted. For centuries after its peak, Venice was still one of Europe's most important commercial centers. That longevity is often overlooked. Decline is rarely a straight line. Cities with deep institutional foundations don't disappear quickly. They adapt. They reconfigure. They survive longer than outsiders expect. But the trajectory was clear. By the 1600s, Amsterdam has replaced Venice as Europe's dominant commercial hub. By the 1700s, London surpassed both. Venice became a regional power, then a tourist destination, then a memory. What's striking is how quickly dominance shifted once the structural advantages disappeared. When Venice lost control of trade routes, monopoly power evaporated. When competitors accessed the same markets directly, Venetian markups collapsed. When military costs exceeded commercial profits, the model broke. Wealth didn't migrate cleanly. It dispersed. And this is where the story stops being about medieval commerce and starts being about systems, including our own. Venice's rise and fall challenges a deeply embedded assumption that wealth follows production or innovation. It doesn't, not primarily. Wealth follows position. It follows control of flows. It follows the ability to tax transactions without producing anything yourself. When those advantages disappear, prosperity erodes, regardless of how sophisticated your institutions are. Modern economies operate on the same principles, just with different mechanisms. Financial centers thrive not because they make things, but because capital flows through them. Tech platforms dominate not through production, but through network control. Supply chain choke points create power far beyond their physical size. The pattern hasn't changed, only the vocabulary has. There's a quiet irony here. Many people admire Venice's art and architecture while dismissing its commercial ruthlessness as outdated or amoral. But the art existed because of the ruthlessness. The palaces were built with monopoly profits. The cultural brilliance was funded by economic extraction. You can't separate them. Venice understood something fundamental that modern economies still rely on. Prosperity isn't about making the best product. It's about controlling access. At the same time, Venice's decline offers a warning without nostalgia. No monopoly survives technological disruption indefinitely. No commercial advantage outlasts geographic shifts. When new routes open, when competitors access the same suppliers, when military costs exceed commercial returns, even the richest trading empire becomes vulnerable. This isn't a moral story. It's a structural one. Venice didn't fall because it was corrupt or lazy. It fell because its model depended on conditions that eventually changed. The geographic advantage that made Venice indispensable became irrelevant when ships could sail around Africa. The monopolies that generated wealth collapsed when others accessed the same sources. That doesn't diminish the achievement. It clarifies it. The Venetian Republic reminds us that real wealth isn't measured only in gold or monuments. It's measured in control. How well does a society position itself between production and consumption? How effectively does it monopolize valuable flows? How long can it maintain structural advantages against competition and change? Venice did this better than any European state of its time. For 700 years, it proved that prosperity could be engineered, scaled, and defended through institutions, contracts, and control violence, as long as the geographic and technological conditions that supported it remained intact. History didn't forget Venice because it failed. It forgot it because later empires, British, Dutch, American, used the same model on larger scales and wrote the narratives. But when we look honestly, the lesson is unmistakable. Wealth follows control flows. Power follows monopoly. And when geography or technology shifts, dominance doesn't fade gracefully. It collapses. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers.